The wind howled through the skeletal branches of the old oaks lining Elmwood Drive, carrying the bite of a late autumn chill that seeped into bones like forgotten regret. Ava Cole, just 13, huddled on the splintered wooden steps of her family's modest two-story home, her thin jacket no match for the dropping temperature. Tears streaked her face, mixing with the drizzle that had started to fall, turning the ground into a slick mirror of her fear. The front door loomed shut before her, its brass knocker mocking her small fists that had pounded until they bruised. "Please, Victor," she'd begged through the crack earlier, her voice cracking like thin ice, but her stepfather's response had been a curt lock of the deadbolt, his shadow retreating into the warm glow of the living room light she could see flickering through the curtains. He hadn't said a word, just left her there, as if she were a stray dog too troublesome to feed. The neighborhood was silent, the houses dark and unyielding, no neighbor daring to intervene in the Harlan household's private storms. Ava's phone trembled in her numb fingers. The screen's blue light, the only warmth she had. She scrolled to the one contact she trusted, the one voice from a life that felt like a half-remembered dream. Dad. If this story's already gripping you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got a long road ahead, full of heart and grit. Mason Cole gripped the handlebars of his weathered Harley-Davidson, the engine's low rumble vibrating through his leather-clad frame as he idled at a red light on the outskirts of Riverton. At 39, he was a ghost of the Marine he'd once been, broad-shouldered with a salt-and-pepper beard that hid the scar running along his jaw from a desert skirmish long buried. The road had become his compass since his divorce 5 years back, drifting from one dusty town to the next with the Iron Promise crew, a loose brotherhood of vets and wanderers bound by oaths older than the chrome on their bikes. Promises like the one he'd made to his daughter Ava on her 8th birthday, whispered over a shared slice of chocolate cake. "No matter where the wind takes me, kiddo, you call, and I'm there." That's my word. He'd kept his distance after Sarah's death 2 years ago, respecting the new life Victor Harlan had built, or so he'd told himself. But tonight, as his phone buzzed against his thigh, shattering the quiet hum of the engine, that promise clawed its way back to the surface. He pulled over to the shoulder, the gravel crunching under his boots as he yanked off his helmet. The caller's ID glowed. Ava. His heart thudded like a war drum. "Ava! Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Her sobs came through the line, jagged and raw, painting a picture worse than any battlefield he'd known. Locked out, freezing. Victor wouldn't open the door, had been forgetting her needs more and more, skipping school pickups, rationing her meals, whispering that she was just like her runaway father, better off gone. Mason's grip tightened on the phone, knuckles whitening. The light had turned green behind him, horns blaring from impatient drivers, but the world narrowed to her voice. "I'm coming, Ava. Hold on. Where are you exactly?" She rattled off the address in Willow Creek, 3 towns over, a 45-minute ride on clear roads. But Mason didn't do clear roads. He revved the engine, the roar splitting the night like a vow renewed, and tore off into the darkness, weaving through traffic with the precision of a man who'd outrun worse than time. The miles blurred under his tires, the scent of rain-soaked asphalt rising to meet him. Headlights cutting yellow swaths through the fog, memories flooded in unbidden, Sarah's laugh echoing in their old apartment, Ava's tiny hand in his during those rare weekends he'd stolen from the road. He'd drifted away after the divorce, chasing horizons to outpace the guilt of a marriage fractured by his absences. Sarah had remarried Victor, a local real estate broker with a smile sharp as a switchblade, promising stability. Mason had nodded from afar, sending checks and cards, convincing himself it was enough. But Ava's call shattered that illusion. His phone buzzed again, texts from her. "He's yelling inside, says I'm lying about you." Then a photo, the locked door, her shadow small against it. Rage simmered low in his chest, not the hot fury of youth, but a cold resolve forged in foxholes. He pushed the bike harder, the wind whipping at his face, carrying the faint tang of exhaust and pine from the passing woods. 48 minutes after the call, Mason crested the hill into Willow Creek, the Harlan house coming into view like a sentinel in the storm. Ava's silhouette was still on the steps, curled into herself, rocking slightly against the cold. He killed the engine a block away, not wanting to spook her further, and approached on foot, his boots silent on the wet pavement. "Ava," he whispered as he neared, kneeling to her level. Her eyes, wide and red-rimmed, locked onto his, and she launched into his arms, burying her face in his jacket that smelled of leather and distant roads. "Dad," he said, "I couldn't come in. Said you never cared anyway." Mason held her tight, scanning the house. The curtains twitched, Victor's silhouette watching. No warmth, no welcome. Inside, through the thin walls, muffled voices argued, and Mason caught glimpses. Unpaid bills scattered on the coffee table, Ava's backpack dumped in the corner like trash, signs of a home unraveling under a man's quiet cruelties, emotional barbs that left invisible scars, manipulations that isolated her from friends, from school, from any light beyond these walls. He stood, lifting Ava effortlessly onto his back, her arms looping around his neck like she had as a child. "We're getting you out of here, kid. Tonight." But as he turned toward his bike, porch lights flickered on across the street, neighbors peeking but not approaching. Victor's influence ran deep in this town. Deals with the mayor, handshakes at City Hall that bought silence. Mason knew calling the cops would be a dead end. They'd side with the stable family man over a drifter like him. Still, he pulled out his phone, dialing a number etched in his memory. Jax, his old Marine brother and the Iron Promise's unofficial fixer, a club-connected attorney who'd bent rules for the right causes. "Jax, it's Mason. Need you on this one. My girl's in trouble." The line crackled to life, Jax's gravelly voice steady. "On my way, brother. What's the play?" As the rain picked up, drumming on the roof like impatient fingers, Mason felt the weight of that ancient promise settle deeper. This wasn't just a rescue, it was the spark of a reckoning, a father's quiet stand against shadows that preyed on the vulnerable. And in the world of broken oaths, that stand could pull in the whole crew, forging a family from the road to shield one girl's fragile hope. The night deepened, but for the first time in years, Mason Cole felt anchored. Ava's breath warmed his neck, a small victory against the cold. Yet as Victor's door creaked open behind them, a silhouette stepping into the rain-slicked light, Mason knew the real fight was just beginning, one that would test loyalties, unearth buried truths, and remind a cynical town what honor looked like when it roared to life. Victor Harlan stepped onto the porch, his frame backlit by the harsh glow of the living room lamp, casting long shadows that stretched like accusing fingers across the rain-slicked lawn. He was a man built for boardrooms, not brawls. Mid-50s, with a paunch straining against his button-down shirt and a face etched by the perpetual scowl of someone who believed the world owed him deference. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Mason cradling Ava, the girl's face pressed against her father's shoulder, safe from the downpour that now hammered the earth like judgment. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Victor's voice sliced through the night, laced with the false authority of a man used to unchallenged rule. He descended the steps slowly, hands shoved into his pockets, but there was a tremor in his posture, a flicker of unease at the stranger's unyielding stance. Mason didn't flinch, his boots planted firm in the mud, Ava's weight a grounding force against the storm raging inside him. The air hung heavy, with the scent of wet earth and ozone, the distant rumble of thunder echoing the growl building in his chest. "Taking my daughter home," he replied, his tone low and even, like the steady hum of an idling engine. "Where she belongs, away from whatever games you've been playing." Ava whimpered softly, her fingers twisting into Mason's collar, but he held her steady, his free hand hovering protectively at her back. Victor's gaze darted to the neighbors' windows, where curtains still twitched, witnesses too timid to step forward. In Willow Creek, Harlan was the kingmaker, brokering land deals that lined pockets from the mayor's office to the local precinct. No one crossed him without consequence. "You got no right," Victor spat, stopping a few feet away, the rain beading on his glasses like unshed tears. "Sarah's will left her in my care. You're just the deadbeat who sends postcards from God knows where. Get off my property before I call the cops." The threat hung there, but Mason saw the bluff for what it was. The man's control slipping like gravel under tires. He'd glimpsed the chaos inside, the cluttered table strewn with foreclosure notices, Ava's drawings crumpled in the trash, the subtle signs of a household gripped by quiet tyranny. Victor had been siphoning funds meant for Ava's future, twisting her world into one of isolation and doubt, all under the guise of paternal concern. It wasn't bruises you could photograph, but the kind of erosion that hollowed out a child's spirit, leaving echoes of fear in every locked door and withheld meal. Mason's phone vibrated in his pocket, Jack's, already en route, but he kept his eyes locked on Victor. "Call them," he said, shifting Ava to his side, her small frame trembling against him. "Let's see whose story they buy tonight." The words were a challenge, pulling the first thread of unraveling. Victor hesitated, then pulled out his own cell, dialing with deliberate slowness. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the storm like a false promise of order. 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing blue and red against the darkened houses, painting the scene in stark, cinematic pulses. Officers Ramirez and Hale stepped out, raincoats slick, their faces set in the weary neutrality of small-town enforcers who'd long ago learned which winds to follow. Ramirez, the senior of the two, approached with a nod to Victor. "Mr. Harlan, trouble again?" His tone carried the warmth of familiarity, a subtle lean toward the man who'd funded the department's last community barbecue. Victor launched into his version, the troubled teen sneaking out, fabricating stories about a neglectful guardian to run off with her irresponsible father. Ava buried deeper into Mason's side, but he felt her steeling herself, whispering, "It's not true, Dad. He makes me feel like I'm nothing." Mason's jaw tightened, the scar along it pulling taut, a reminder of battles where truth was the only weapon that lasted. The officers listened, then turned to Mason, their expressions cooling. "Sir, we'll need to verify custody papers," Hale said, notepad in hand, but his eyes flicked to Victor's approving nod. Mason explained the call, the lockout, the months of growing distance Ava had hinted at in their sporadic talks, skipped counseling sessions, restricted phone access, the slow financial stranglehold that left her without even bus fare to school. But the cops waved it off. "Sounds like family matters," Ramirez concluded, glancing at his watch. "No immediate danger here. We'll escort you both off the premises, Mr. Cole. Come back with a court order if you want to push this." Victor smirked from the porch, arms crossed, as if the night were already won. The injustice burned like exhaust in Mason's lungs, not brute force, but the corruption of badges bought with handshakes and favors, turning justice into a privilege for the connected. As the officers herded them toward Mason's bike, Ava's eyes met his, fierce despite the fear. "Don't let him win," she murmured. And in that moment, the promise he'd made years ago ignited fully. He strapped her helmet on with gentle hands, the rain pattering against the leather like impatient applause. "I won't, kid. Not tonight. Not ever." They mounted the Harley, the engine roaring to life beneath them, a defiant symphony against the flashing lights. Mason gunned it down the street, the cops' warnings fading in the rear view, but he knew this was no end. Jax's truck pulled up just as they crested the hill, headlights piercing the veil, the attorney's face grim through the windshield. "Follow me to the motel on Route 9. Jax called over the comms Mason had patched in. "I've got contacts pulling records. Sarah's will, Victor's finances. This isolation crap? It's textbook control, and it leaves a paper trail." The road unspooled before them, slick and unforgiving, the scent of pine and wet asphalt mingling with the faint, comforting trace of Ava's shampoo. Vanilla, like the old days. Mason glanced back at her in the side mirror, her arms wrapped tight around his waist, a fragile anchor in the chaos. But as the taillights of Willow Creek receded, he felt the pull of the iron promise stirring. A text buzzed from Jax. "Crews mobilizing. 3 brothers inbound from Riverton. This Harlan's got skeletons, debts to the club from a bad land deal years back. We're not just saving one girl. We're exposing the rot." The weight of that truth settled like dew on chrome at dawn. Victor's silhouette shrank in the distance, but the shadows he cast reached far, into courts, into homes like this one, where children paid for adult greeds. Miles later, at the dimly lit motel where neon buzzed like a weary heartbeat, Mason carried a sleeping Ava to the room Jax had secured. The attorney waited inside, laptop open to glowing screens of documents, bank statements showing diversions from Ava's trust, emails to school officials pressuring them to overlook her behavioral issues. "Victor's not just abusive," Jax said, pouring black coffee into chipped mugs, the steam rising like unspoken vows. "He's leveraged, owes money to folks who'd love a reason to turn the tables, but we do this clean, leverage the law, not the fist, for her sake." Mason nodded, staring out at the parking lot where more bikes were arriving, headlights converging like stars aligning. Old brothers from the road, Thomas, the quiet welder with a knack for fixing what was broken, Lena, the nurse who'd patched more than wounds in her time with the crew. They weren't blood, but they were chosen, forged in the fire of shared scars and unbreakable words. As dawn crept in, painting the sky in bruised purples, Mason sat by Ava's bedside, her chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm for the first time in months. The fight ahead loomed, custody battles, hearings where Victor's influence would flex like rusted chains. But in the quiet, with the crew's engines idling outside like guardians, Mason felt the promise renew. This wasn't vengeance. It was redemption. A father's quiet roar against the silence that let cruelty thrive. And as the first light glinted off his bike's handlebars, he knew the road would demand more. Allies tested, truths unearthed, a stand that could shield not just Ava, but every kid locked out in the cold, waiting for honor to arrive. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The motel room smelled of stale coffee and faded cigarette smoke, the kind that clung to the walls like unspoken regrets. Sunlight filtered through the threadbare curtains, casting long shadows across the worn carpet where Mason paced, his boots leaving faint imprints in the fibers. Ava slept soundly on the queen bed, her dark hair splayed across the pillow like a forgotten map. The rise and fall of her chest, a fragile testament to the night's toll. Outside, the Iron Promise bikes formed a loose semicircle in the parking lot, engines cooling with soft ticks, their riders dismounting with the quiet efficiency of men who'd answered calls in the dead of night before. Tomas leaned against his chopper, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, his eyes scanning the horizon like a sentinel. Lena, ever the steady hand, unpacked a medical kit from her saddlebag, her nurse's instincts kicking in even without visible wounds. Jax hunched over the laptop at the rickety table, his fingers flying across the keys. The screen's glow, illuminating the deep lines etched into his face from years of courtroom skirmishes and back-alley negotiations. "Look at this," he said, voice a low rumble that didn't wake Ava. He spun the device toward Mason, revealing a cascade of digital trails. Wire transfers from Ava's modest inheritance meant for her education, her future, siphoned into Victor's accounts, masked as household expenses. Emails to the school counselor, pressuring her to label Ava's withdrawal as adolescent rebellion, complete with veiled threats about funding cuts, and deeper still, a web of loans from shady developers, Victor's name tied to deals that skirted the edges of local ordinances, leaving families displaced and pockets empty. "He's not just isolating her," Jax continued, rubbing his stubbled chin. "He's building an empire on borrowed time. That influence with the cops, bought with kickbacks. If we pull this thread, it unravels everything." Mason stopped pacing, leaning in, the scent of rain still clinging to his jacket, mixing with the room's musty air. His mind replayed the porch confrontation, the way Victor's eyes had darted, not with rage, but calculation, like a man cornered by his own greed. The police escort had been a slap, their dismissal a reminder of how power twisted justice into knots, but here, in this neutral ground, the pieces were aligning. "How do we hit him where it hurts?" Mason asked, his voice steady, though the scar on his jaw throbbed with the pulse of restrained fury. Jax leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "Custody first. I file an emergency petition today. Cite the lockout as endangerment. Back it with Ava's testimony and these financials. But Victor's got friends in the courthouse. It'll be a dogfight. We need witnesses, alibis, proof that she's safer with you." The door swung open with a soft whoosh, admitting Tomas and Lena, their boots tracking in gravel from the lot. Tomas, broad and taciturn, with hands calloused from welding frames that held the world together, nodded to Mason. "Heard the play. Victor crossed paths with the club years back, tried to lowball us on a garage lease in Riverton. We walked, but he didn't forget." Lena set her kit down, her eyes softening as they landed on Ava. "I've seen this before," she said, pulling up a chair. "Kids like her, worn down by words sharper than knives. Emotional scars heal slow, but they do. We'll get her to a counselor, one not on his payroll." The room filled with the quiet energy of purpose, the chosen family knitting together like links in a chain, each bringing skills forged from their own battles, war, loss, the endless road. As the morning wore on, the plan took shape over cooling mugs of coffee, the steam curling like whispered strategies. Jax drafted the petition on his phone, his marine-honed precision turning legalese into a weapon. "We serve him at home, make it public, neighbors watching, force his hand." Mason glanced at Ava, stirring now, her eyes fluttering open to the unfamiliar room. She sat up, rubbing sleep from her face, the vulnerability in her gaze twisting something deep in his chest. "Dad, is this real?" He crossed to her, sitting on the bed's edge, the mattress dipping under his weight. "Real as my promise, kid. You're safe now. Tell us what he's done. All of it. Every word, every time he made you feel small." Her voice came halting at first, then in a rush. The late nights Victor spent on calls, barking orders, the way he'd hide her phone, claiming it was for her own good, the meals portioned out like punishments, leaving her stomach hollow and her confidence thinner. No raised hands, but the control was ironclad, a slow poison that isolated her from the world. The crew listened without interruption, the air thickening with shared outrage, not the explosive kind, but a simmering resolve that built like thunder on the horizon. Thomas sketched a timeline on a napkin, marking dates of the diversions Jax had uncovered. Lena noted Ava's symptoms, nightmares, appetite loss, preparing a report that would stand in court. Outside, more bikes arrived, a low rumble announcing reinforcements, 5 brothers from the outer chapters, vets who'd traded fatigues for leathers, but never the oath of brotherhood. They gathered in the lot, conferring in murmurs, their presence a silent vow that this fight was theirs too. One, a wiry mechanic named Reyes, had a lead. Victor's latest deal involved foreclosing on a widow's home, the same widow who'd once helped the club during a brutal winter run. "Payback's poetic," Reyes said, spitting into the gravel. "We document it all. Let the truth do the riding." By noon, the petition was filed remotely, Jax's contacts fast-tracking it through a sympathetic judge in the next county over, someone who'd heard whispers of Harlan's overreach. Mason stepped outside for air, the sun warming his face as he lit a cigarette, the flame flickering against the breeze. The parking lot hummed with activity, bikes tuned, phones buzzing with updates. Ava joined him, bundled in one of his old hoodies that swallowed her frame, the fabric carrying the faint scent of engine oil and freedom. "What if he fights back?" she asked, her voice small against the vast sky. Mason exhaled smoke, watching it dissipate like doubts. "He will. But we're not alone. These men, these people, they're your family now, same as mine. We stand, we endure, that's the iron promise." The response came swift. A text from an unknown number. Victor, no doubt, laced with threats veiled as concern. "This isn't over. You'll regret dragging her into your chaos." Mason deleted it without reply, pocketing the phone as Jax emerged, keys in hand. "Warrant for a welfare check's incoming. We head back to Willow Creek at dusk. Observe, don't engage. Let the law turn on him." The crew mounted up, engines igniting in a chorus that vibrated through the ground, a mechanical heartbeat pulsing with intent. Ava climbed on behind Mason, her arms secure around him, the road ahead shimmering with heat waves that promised trials but also clarity. As they rolled out, the motel shrinking in the mirrors, Mason felt the weight shift, not heavier, but purposeful. Victor's empire of whispers and deals was cracking, exposed to the light of accountability. This chapter of the reckoning wasn't about fists or fury, but the unyielding pull of loyalty, drawing lines in the sand where honor met corruption. The wind rushed past, carrying the tang of pine and possibility as father and daughter, and the brotherhood that bound them, rode toward the heart of the storm, where promises were tested and truths forged anew. The sun dipped low on the horizon, bleeding orange and crimson across the cracked asphalt of Route 9, as the Iron Promise convoy cut through the twilight like a blade through silk. Mason led the pack, his Harley humming with restrained power, Ava's arms locked around his waist, her chin resting against his back, as if drawing strength from the steady rhythm of the engine. Behind them, the crew followed in formation, Thomas on his customized lowrider, Lena trailing in her sturdy touring bike, Jax in the lead truck with Reyes and the others fanning out like shadows. The air whipped cool and sharp, carrying the earthy scent of approaching dusk, mingled with the metallic tang of exhaust, a sensory reminder that the road was both refuge and reckoning. Willow Creek loomed ahead, its familiar streets now laced with tension, the Harlan house a beacon of unresolved storm at the end of Elmwood Drive. They parked a block away, engines cutting off in a synchronized hush that left only the whisper of wind through the leaves and the distant call of a lone crow. Mason dismounted first, helping Ava down with a gentle hand on her shoulder, her eyes wide but resolute in the fading light. "Stay close," he murmured, the words a quiet vow etched in the lines of his face. Jax joined them, his laptop tucked under one arm, a manila folder of freshly printed documents in the other, affidavits from the club's network, timelines of Victor's financial slights, even a sworn statement from the widow whose home he'd targeted. "Welfare checks official," Jax said, checking his watch. "Deputies on our side this time. Pulled strings with a judge who owes the crew a favor from a flood relief run last spring. No more Harlan puppets." The group moved as one, a silent procession blending into the lengthening shadows, their leathers creaking softly with each step. Neighbors' porch lights flickered on, casting wary glows, but no one emerged. The sight of the bikers, Tattooed arms, purposeful strides, spoke of boundaries not to be crossed. Ava pointed to the house, her voice a hushed thread in the cooling air. "That's his car. He's home." The vehicle sat crooked in the driveway, a sleek sedan muddied from the night's rain, its hood still warm to the touch when Thomas brushed by it discreetly. Inside, through the half-drawn blinds, Victor paced the living room, phone pressed to his ear, his gestures sharp and agitated, like a cornered animal sensing the trap. The deputy arrived minutes later, a no-nonsense woman named Ellis, her cruiser pulling up without fanfare, lights off to keep the peace. She'd served with Jax's brother-in-arms years back, bound by the same code of quiet honor that the Iron Promise upheld. "Mr. Cole," she greeted, nodding to the group without judgment. "Petitions in motion. I'm here for the check. Make sure the girl's not in immediate risk." Her eyes softened on Ava, who stood taller now, flanked by Lena's steady presence. They approached the door together, Mason hanging back with the crew, their formation a protective arc. Victor yanked the door open before the knock landed, his face flushed, sweat beading despite the chill. "What is this? Harassment." "I already told your buddies last night." "Mr. Harlan," Ellis interrupted, her tone clipped and professional, badge glinting under the porch light. "Emergency welfare visit. Step aside." Victor's bluster faltered, his eyes flicking over the bikers, calculating the odds. He complied with a forced scoff, leading them inside where the air hung stale, thick with the odor of takeout containers and unwashed tension. The living room was a tableau of disarray, mail piled high on the side table, some stamped "Final Notice," Ava's schoolbooks shoved into a corner amid dust bunnies. Ellis scanned it all methodically, her notepad flipping open. "Mind if I see the girls' room?" Victor hesitated, then gestured upstairs. But Ava spoke up, her voice gaining steel. "It's fine, deputy, but he took my savings jar, said it was for family debts. And the locks, he changed them last month, told me it was to keep bad influences out." Victor's face twisted, a vein pulsing at his temple. "Lies! She's dramatic, always has been since her mother—" He cut off as Jack stepped forward, unfolding the folder with deliberate calm. "Save it for the judge, Harlan. We've got bank records showing you dipping into her trust, over $5,000 in the last year, and those emails to the school, pressuring them to isolate her, that's not parenting, that's control." The attorney's words landed like gravel under tires, each one grinding away at Victor's facade. Ellis's expression hardened, her pen scratching notes as she radioed for backup to secure the scene. "This constitutes potential endangerment. I'm recommending temporary removal pending hearing." The room crackled with unspoken fury, Victor's hands clenching at his sides, but the crew's presence held him in check. No raised voices, just the unyielding weight of witnesses who'd seen worse and stood firmer. Thomas lingered by the door, his welder's eyes spotting the subtle signs, a loose floorboard near the stairs, perhaps hiding more ledgers. Lena noted the sparse fridge upstairs, stocked more for one than for a growing girl. Ava retrieved a small box from her room, photos of her with Mason and Sarah, a locket from her 8th birthday, the last remnants of a life before the isolation. As they filed out, Victor's glare burned into Mason's back, a promise of retaliation whispered under his breath. "You'll lose her for good." Outside, under the star-pricked sky, the group regrouped by the bikes, the night's chill nipping at exposed skin. Ellis handed Mason a temporary custody slip, her grip firm. "Hearing set for next week. Keep her safe. Harlan's got pull." But truth cuts deeper. Ava clutched the box to her chest, tears glinting but not falling, her small victory etched in the way she leaned into her father's side. The crew mounted up, engines stirring to life in a low, resonant chorus that vibrated through the quiet street, a mechanical affirmation of bonds reforged. As they rode into the enveloping dark, The scent of cooling metal and pine trailing them, Mason felt the promise evolve, not just his word to Ava, but a collective oath against the shadows that preyed on the defenseless. Victor's house receded in the mirrors, its lights dimming like a fading threat. But the road ahead twisted with trials, courtroom ambushes, unearthed alliances, the slow burn of justice against entrenched rot. Back at the motel, the fire pit crackled in the courtyard, casting flickering warmth over the gathered riders as they shared stories around the flames, tales of lost battles won through grit, not guns. Ava sat cross-legged nearby, sketching in a notebook Lena had provided, her pencil strokes tracing the outlines of bikes and horizons, reclaiming pieces of herself. Mason watched her, the firelight dancing in his eyes, the weight of the day settling like embers. This fight was weaving them tighter, a family chosen from the fringes, their loyalty a shield against the cynicism that let men like Victor thrive. Yet doubt flickered too. What if the courts bent? What if old scars reopened? He pushed it down, focusing on the now. Ava's quiet laugh at Thomas's joke. Jack's plotting the next move over a beer. The night deepened, stars wheeling overhead like silent witnesses as the Iron Promise held vigil, their honor a beacon in the gathering storm. If this story's got your heart racing, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder of real family. The courtroom in the county seat of Eldridge hummed, with the subdued tension of lives hanging in the balance, its wooden benches worn smooth by decades of whispered pleas and hammered gavels. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, dust motes dancing like hesitant witnesses in the air, thick with the scent of polished oak and faint traces of ink from stacked files. Mason Cole sat rigid in the front row, his leather jacket a stark contrast to the starched suits around him, Ava's hand small and warm in his. She fidgeted with the hem of her new sweater, Lena's gift, soft wool that carried a hint of lavender from the nurse's pack. Her eyes fixed on the judge's elevated bench, where the empty chair loomed like an impartial throne. It had been a week since the welfare check, 7 days of shadowed vigilance, the crew rotating watches at the motel, Jax poring over documents until his eyes burned, and Ava slowly unfurling stories of isolation that twisted Mason's gut like barbed wire. Victor Harlan entered from a side door, his posture ramrod straight, flanked by a slick attorney whose briefcase gleamed like false promises. No tremor in his step now. He'd rallied his network, whispers of influence threading through the halls like smoke. The bailiff called the session to order. The judge, a stern woman named Harlan no relation, her grey hair pulled into a severe bun, settling behind the bench with a rustle of robes. "Emergency custody hearing in the matter of Ava Cole," she intoned, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, carrying the weight of decisions that could shatter or mend. Jax rose for the petitioner, his gravelly timbre steady as he laid out the case. The lockout on that rain-lashed night, the financial diversions from Ava's trust, 5,000 and change, rerouted to Victor's sinking ventures, and the subtle erosion of her world, from withheld meals to engineered solitude that left her spirit frayed at the edges. Victor's lawyer countered with polished deflection, painting Mason as the transient phantom, a drifter whose lifestyle endangered stability. "Mr. Harlan has provided a roof routine," the man argued, his words slick as oil on water. "The child's tales are born of teenage angst, amplified by absence." But Jax was ready, calling witnesses in measured succession. Lena took the stand first, her nurse's scrubs traded for a simple blouse, her testimony clinical yet laced with quiet fire. Ava's physical signs, subtle weight loss, shadows under her eyes from restless nights, markers of stress that no child should bear. "It's not visible scars," she said, meeting the judge's gaze, "but the kind that linger, hollowing out trust." Thomas followed, his welder's hands folded neatly, recounting the crew's observations during the welfare visit, the sparse pantry, the changed locks, the air of a home-turned cage. Ava's turn came like a storm breaking. She approached the stand unprompted, her steps tentative but eyes clear, the courtroom's hush amplifying the soft tap of her shoes on the tile. "He made me feel like I didn't belong," she said, voice steady despite the quiver at its edges, the words hanging in the still air. "Locked me out that night because I asked about my dad, said I was better off without family who runs away." The judge leaned forward, her pen pausing. As Ava described the jar of coins, her birthday savings vanished into debts, the phone restrictions that severed her from friends, the whispers that painted her as the problem. No accusations of overt harm, just the steady drip of control, eroding her like wind on stone. Mason watched from his seat, pride swelling fierce in his chest, mingled with the ache of years lost to his own drifts. This was her stand, a spark of the resilience Sarah had nurtured, now blooming under the iron promise's shadow. Victor's cross-examination veered sharp, his lawyer probing for cracks. "Isn't it possible your father's sudden interest is guilt-driven fantasy?" But Ava held firm, her small frame belying the steel within. "No, Dad kept his promise. He came." The gallery murmured, a ripple of empathy from the back rows where locals, tipped off by the crew's quiet outreach, sat as neutral observers, their presence a subtle pressure against the town's old guard. Jax sealed it with the financials, projected on a screen. Ledgers showing Victor's slights, loans entangled with developers who displaced families, including the widow Reyes had championed. "This isn't custody," Jax concluded, his voice resonant. "It's protection from exploitation. Mr. Harlan's actions risk not just one child, but enable a pattern that preys on the vulnerable." The judge called a recess, the gavel's crack slicing the tension like a blade, and the courtroom emptied into the hallway where fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Mason pulled Ava into a hug, her head against his chest, the faint scent of her shampoo grounding him amid the swirl of uncertainty. The crew waited outside the doors, Thomas nursing a coffee from the vending machine, Lena reviewing notes on her phone, more brothers from the outer chapters forming a loose cordon, their leathers a tapestry of shared oaths. "She's tough," Thomas grunted, clapping Mason's shoulder, the gesture heavy with unspoken solidarity. But doubt gnawed. Victor's glare from across the hall promised countersuits, character assassinations, the machinery of influence grinding against their truth. Resuming, the judge's deliberation stretched, her fingers steepled as she weighed the scales. "Emotional well-being is paramount," she finally ruled, her tone measured, eyes scanning the room. "Temporary full custody to Mr. Cole. Pending full investigation, Mr. Harlan, you'll surrender financial oversight immediately. Counseling mandated for all parties." The words landed like rain after drought, a quiet victory that rippled through the benches. Victor's face drained of color, his lawyer whispering furiously, but the damage was done, the first fracture in his carefully built walls. Ava turned to Mason, tears brimming but triumphant, her hand squeezing his as they rose. "We did it," she whispered, the words a bridge across the chasm of lost time. Outside, the afternoon sun warmed the courthouse steps, casting long shadows that danced with the breeze carrying hints of distant rain. The crew converged, engines idling in the lot like patient beasts, a low rumble celebrating without fanfare. Jax pocketed his notes, a rare smile cracking his face. "It's a start. But he'll appeal, dig in. We've got more trails to follow. Those developer ties lead to City Hall." Mason nodded, lifting Ava onto his bike, her laughter light as she adjusted the helmet. The first unguarded sound in days. The convoy formed, rolling out in unison, the road unspooling toward the motel that had become temporary haven. Yet as Willow Creek's outskirts blurred by, Mason sensed the horizon darkening, Victor's retaliation brewing, perhaps in forged documents or pressured testimonies, testing the Iron Promise's resolve. Back at base, around the fire pit that evening, flames crackling against the encroaching chill, the group debriefed. Reyes shared a new lead, a former associate of Victor's, willing to testify about coerced deals that mirrored the Harlan home's quiet tyrannies. Lena checked Ava's vitals, her touch maternal, while Thomas sketched modifications to the bikes, reinforcements for the road ahead. Stories flowed like the coffee, tales of past stands where loyalty outlasted storms, weaving Ava into the fold. She sketched by the fire, her lines bolder now, capturing the convoy's silhouettes against the stars. Mason sat apart, staring into the embers, the promise he'd whispered years ago evolving into a legacy. Not just survival, but safeguarding the fragile against the entitled. Victor's shadow lingered, but in this circle of chosen kin, honor burned brighter. A beacon against the gathering dusk of trials yet to come. The night air hummed with possibility, engines waiting, bonds unyielding, as father and daughter, and the brotherhood that enveloped them, braced for the deeper fray. The embers from the previous night's fire still smoldered in the motel's courtyard, releasing faint wisps of smoke that curled into the crisp morning air like lingering doubts. Mason Cole stood by his Harley, wiping dew from the handlebars with a chamois cloth, the soft scrape of fabric against chrome, the only sound breaking the dawn's hush. Ava emerged from the room, her backpack slung over one shoulder, the temporary custody slip tucked safely inside like a fragile talisman. At 13, she moved with a newfound lightness. The sweater from Lena hugging her frame as she approached, the scent of fresh coffee wafting from the mug she carried. "Ready for the ride?" Mason asked, his voice rough from a night of fitful sleep, the scar along his jaw catching the first rays of sun. She nodded, but her eyes held a shadow, the weight of the hearing's aftershocks. Victor's defeated glare replaying in her mind like a looped reel. The crew was already stirring, Thomas tinkering with an engine block in the lot, the metallic clinks echoing his methodical focus. Lena folding blankets with efficient snaps, her nurse's gaze assessing Ava from afar. Jax pulled up in his truck, gravel crunching under the tires, a stack of files spilling onto the passenger seat. "Appeals filed," he announced, stepping out with a grim nod, the air between them thickening with the unspoken. Victor's pulling strings, character witnesses from his real estate circle, painting you as unstable, Mason. Says your biker lifestyle is a risk to her future. Mason's grip tightened on the cloth, knuckles paling, but he exhaled slowly, the steam of his breath mingling with the cooling dew. The road had been his exile after Sarah's death, a drift born of guilt for the absences that fractured their family. Now it was his anchor, the iron promise, a constellation of second chances. "Let him try," he replied, mounting the bike as Ava climbed on behind him, her arms encircling his waist with trust earned in rain and resolve. The convoy assembled without fanfare, engines igniting in a staggered roar that vibrated through the ground, a mechanical pulse sinking their determination. They rolled out toward Eldridge for follow-up counseling, the highway unfurling like a vein of possibility, flanked by fields golden in the low light, the wind carrying hints of turned earth and distant rain. But Victor's retaliation came swift, slicing through the morning like a hidden blade. As they crested a hill overlooking Willow Creek, Jax's phone buzzed insistently, pulling the truck to the shoulder. The group halted in a loose formation, dust settling around them. "Bad news," Jax said, his face hardening as he read the screen. "Harlan's attorney dug up your old service record. Mason twisted it, claims your PTSD makes you unfit, and he's subpoenaed the neighbors, coaching them to say the lockout was a misunderstanding, that Ava's better off in structure." The words landed heavy, stirring the faint echo of desert sands in Mason's memory, the ghosts of missions where promises to brothers meant survival. He'd buried those scars deep, confiding only in the crew during late-night rides, but now they surfaced, weaponized by a man whose own sins festered unchecked. Ava's hold tightened, her voice muffled against his back. "They can't use that against you. You came for me." Mason glanced in the side mirror, meeting her reflected eyes, fierce and unyielding. The crew closed ranks, Thomas revving his engine in silent solidarity. Lena calling ahead to the counselor for support notes, but the real blow waited at the Eldridge Community Center, a squat brick building with flags snapping in the breeze. As they parked, a sleek black SUV idled across the street. Victor's proxy, a private investigator with a clipboard and a sneer, snapping photos of the bikes, the group, Ava's tentative smile. "Documenting the environment," the man called out, his tone laced with mock concern. The cameras clicked like a taunt. Inside the counselor's office, the air smelled of chamomile tea and worn leather. The room a sanctuary of neutral tones and potted ferns that filtered the harsh midday sun. Dr. Ellis, no relation to the deputy, but a woman with kind eyes and a notepad that invited truths, sat across from Ava. Her questions gentle probes into the isolation's toll. The gnawing doubt, the way Victor's words had built walls higher than any locked door. "You describe feeling invisible," she noted, her pen scratching softly. "Like your voice didn't matter." Ava nodded, glancing at Mason through the observation window, where he waited with the crew, his broad frame filling the narrow hall. "Until Dad. He showed up. That's what matters." The session broke for lunch, but outside, Reyes pulled Mason aside, his wiry frame tense under the noonday glare. "Got a tip from that associate? Victor's not stopping at custody. He's leveraging the appeal to bury the financial probe. But we hit pay dirt. Records show he's done this before. 2 other kids from past marriages, funds diverted, families splintered. One girl's still in foster care because of his stability claims." The revelation hung in the air, sharp as the scent of hot asphalt rising from the lot, painting Victor not as a lone tyrant, but a pattern of predation, his influence a web ensnaring the vulnerable for profit. Mason's resolve hardened, the old Marine instinct surfacing, not for war, but for the quiet justice of exposure. "We go public," he said, the words a vow, "not vengeance, truth. Let the town see the man behind the deals." The afternoon unfolded in strategy, the crew converging at a roadside diner where pie tins gleamed under fluorescent lights and the jukebox hummed forgotten ballads. Jax mapped the appeal timeline on a napkin, grease stains framing his notes, counter with expert testimony from Lena, affidavits from the affected families, a press tip to a local reporter who'd clashed with Harlan's developments. Thomas offered his garage as neutral ground for meetings, his voice a low rumble. "We'll stand witness, all of us." Ava listened from the booth, sketching the group's silhouettes, her lines capturing the unyielding bonds that no courtroom could sever. Yet as the sun arced westward, casting elongated shadows across the checkered floor, a call from the deputy pierced the planning. Victor had filed a restraining order addendum barring Mason from Willow Creek without supervision, citing safety concerns from his associates. Rage flickered in Mason's chest, cold and controlled, the diner's bell jingling as patrons glanced their way. He stepped outside, the gravel biting his boots, pulling out his phone to dial an old contact. A journalist from the club's network, hungry for stories of corruption masked as community service. "Expose the pattern," he instructed, the line crackling with distance. "Start with the widow, the kids. Show how his family values bleed towns dry." Hanging up, he rejoined the group, the air now charged with momentum, the scent of frying onions from the kitchen, underscoring the human stakes. Ava met his gaze, her drawing complete, a convoy charging toward light. "We're fighting for more than us, aren't we?" she asked, the question a bridge to legacy. Dusk fell as they rode back, the sky bruising purple, engines thrumming like a shared heartbeat. Victor's web was fraying, threads of truth pulling taut, but the appeal loomed like thunder on the ridge. Tests of conscience, alliances strained, the risk of old wounds reopening under scrutiny. At the motel, fireside vigil renewed. Stories circled the flames, Reyes recounting the widow's gratitude, a quiet thanks for amplifying her voice. Mason held Ava close, the night's chill nipping at their edges. Feeling the promise expand, a father's redemption entwining with a brotherhood's oath, shielding not just one girl, but the fragile hopes crushed under greed's weight. Yet in the flickering light, a text from Jax glowed, Harlan's escalating. Anonymous tip says he's digging into the crew's past. Brace. The road twisted onward, honor's roar building against the storm's howl, as the iron promise prepared to stand unbowed. The gravel lot of the Eldridge courthouse crackled under the tires of the Iron Promise convoy as they pulled in under a sky heavy with the promise of rain, clouds churning like unresolved grievances. Mason Cole killed his engine first, the silence settling thick around them, broken only by the soft patter of early drops on leather jackets. Ava dismounted behind him, her backpack heavier now with sketches and notes from the week's counseling, pages filled with horizons unbroken, symbols of a spirit reclaiming its ground. At 13, she stood taller, the temporary custody a bridge that had steadied her steps, but the appeal hearing loomed like the storm's edge, Victor Harlan's final gambit to claw back control. Inside, the courtroom felt smaller this time. The air charged with the faint ozone of tension, wooden panels absorbing the murmurs of spectators who'd grown from a handful to a full gallery. Locals drawn by whispers of the journalist's article printed that morning in the regional paper. Headlines screamed of shadows in Willow Creek, a broker's hidden debts and fractured homes, laying bare Victor's pattern, diverted funds from vulnerable families, coerced silences from schools and courts, lives upended for profit. The widow from the foreclosure sat in the back row, her hands clasped, eyes meeting Ava's with quiet solidarity. Mason guided his daughter to their seats, his broad frame a shield, the scar on his jaw a subtle map of battles that had taught him endurance over explosion. Victor entered with his entourage, his face a mask of calculated calm, but the lines around his eyes betrayed the fraying. Sleepless nights since the exposure, deals crumbling as partners distanced themselves. His attorney, the same slick operator, shuffled papers with forced poise, but the tide had turned. The judge from the prior hearing presided again, her expression unreadable as the bailiff called order. Jax rose, his voice a steady anchor amid the room's hush. "Your Honor, this appeal isn't justice, it's desperation. Mr. Harlan's record shows a trail of exploitation, not protection. We've affidavits from 2 prior families, corroborating the financial manipulations and emotional isolation." He projected the documents, timelines linking Victor's ventures to drained trusts, emails pressuring officials, even a recorded call where he dismissed a child's pleas as drama to mask his schemes. The defense fired back, dredging Mason's past like mud from a ditch, the PTSD diagnosis from his Marine days, framed as volatility, the drifter life as instability. "This man rides with outlaws," the lawyer sneered, gesturing to the crew filling the rear benches, their leathers a testament to bonds forged in fire. What future for a girl in that chaos? But Jax countered swiftly, calling Mason to the stand. He approached with measured steps, the wooden floor creaking under his boots, sunlight catching the silver in his beard like glints of resolve. "I drifted after Sarah died," he admitted, voice low but carrying to every corner the scent of rain seeping through cracked windows, underscoring his words. "Guilt for the time I missed. But that promise to Ava, on her 8th birthday over cake and candlelight, I'd be there if she called. I honored it. These people, my chosen family. Vets, healers, builders. We've patched more than bikes. We've mended lives." Ava followed, her testimony the heart of the fray. She faced Victor across the room, his gaze averted now, and spoke of the lockout's chill, the hollow ache of meals doled like favors, the way his words had dimmed her light until her father's arrival reignited it. "He's not chaos," she said, voice clear as a bell in the vaulted space. "He's home. And those other kids, they deserve someone to show up too." The gallery shifted, a collective breath held, as the widow took the stand next, her voice trembling but true. Victor's foreclosure had left her homeless, her savings siphoned under false pretenses, mirroring the quiet thefts from Ava's world. "He preys on the grieving," she finished, tears glinting but chin high. The judge's pen scratched notes, the room's air thickening with the weight of exposed truths, no longer whispers, but shouts in the light. Recess brought a storm's downpour, rain lashing the windows like catharsis, the hallway a blur of hurried steps and shared glances. Mason pulled Ava aside, kneeling to her level, the wet wool of her sweater brushing his hands. "Proud of you, kid. No matter what." The crew encircled them, Tomas with a nod that spoke volumes, Lena pressing a thermos of hot cocoa into Ava's palms, Reyes murmuring updates from the journalist, more tips flooding in, Victor's allies scattering like leaves in the gale. Back in session, the defense faltered, their appeals to stability ringing hollow against the evidence pile. Victor himself took the stand, his testimony a web of deflections, misunderstandings, business necessities, but cracks showed, sweat beading on his brow, voice pitching higher when pressed on the trusts. The judge deliberated in chambers, the weight stretching like the road after a long ride, tension coiling in Mason's chest as thunder rumbled outside. When she returned, her gavel poised, the room fell silent save for the rain's steady drum. "The appeal is denied," she ruled, words slicing clean. "Full custody to Mr. Cole, with supervised visitation for Mr. Harlan pending rehabilitation. Financial assets frozen for restitution to affected parties, including the miners' trust. This court recognizes not just legal rights, but moral imperatives, protection from patterns of harm that extend beyond one home." Victor slumped, his empire's facade crumbling, as deputies approached with orders for audits that would unravel his dealings, shielding other children from the same shadowed grasp. The courtroom emptied into clearing skies, rain-scented air washing over them like renewal. Ava launched into Mason's arms, laughter bubbling free, the weight of isolation lifting as the crew spilled out, engines roaring in triumphant harmony. They rode back to Willow Creek not as invaders, but liberators. Past the Harlan house, now dark and empty, Victor's sedan gone, whispers of investigations buzzing through the town. At the motel's courtyard, the fire pit blazed high, flames leaping against the dusk as stories wove around it. The widow's home, saved by a community fund the club kickstarted. Ava's sketches passed hand to hand, capturing their unbreakable circle. Mason sat with his daughter under the stars, the night's chill held at bay by shared warmth, the promise from years past fulfilled in full, a legacy of quiet stands that rippled outward. Victor's shadow had faded, exposed to light, but the road taught that threats lingered, yet in this chosen family, loyalty was the truest armor. Ava leaned against him, her voice soft. "We did more than win, Dad. We fixed something broken." He nodded, the horizon calling with new rides, new oaths, honor's engine ever humming. The iron promise endured, a beacon for the lost, proving that one cry in the cold could summon a storm of redemption. Thank you for riding this road with us. If these stories of unbreakable promises and chosen family move you, hit subscribe and join the brotherhood. More tales await on the horizon.